My name's Robert Gregory, and I'm the Public Affairs Director of the Australian Jewish Association. Astoundingly, and unfortunately, this is the second interview I'm doing this week to expose yet another anti-Israel series of events in the Australian Jewish community. A few weeks ago, AUJS reported about a couple of speakers being brought out by the far-left Plus 61J and hosted by AUJS, the Australasian Union of Jewish Students. AUJS had described the Palestinian Arab ex-terrorist who spent 7 years in prison for hurling a grenade at some Israelis as a resistance fighter. Sadly, from Plus 61J and AUJS, it wasn't particularly surprising. But the story didn't end there. The speakers were promoted by the Australian Jewish News and then went on to the ABC, calling IDF soldiers war criminals and blaming the so-called occupation for every evil under the sun. Somehow, these speakers were then invited into multiple Jewish schools and allowed to address the children there. Schools like King David in Melbourne, Masada College in Sydney. To my surprise, my old school, Moriah College, which is a very well-respected Zionist institution. This would have never happened when I was at school there, so that's a reflection of how far left some of our community have moved. My guest today is David Schulberg, JA radio presenter and creator of the website J Media Online. David has been one of the lone voices bringing this issue to light, and thank you for joining me today, David.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Robin, being on the other side of the microphone, so to speak. I'm normally doing the interviews.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Let's start by getting straight into it. Rami Elchanan and Bassem Aramin, they both lost children in the conflict, and they're now friends. So it sounds very heartwarming. But can you share some of the background of this duo? How did you hear about them? And what do Australian Jews need to know about their stories?
Well, I first became aware of them because of a book that I read, which is by Colin McCann. It's a novel called Paragon, and it's an interestingly presented book with various chapters that sort of allude to different stories which describe what is going on within in Israel-Palestine. But the flavour of it is one wouldn't say would be terribly pro-Israel, but it's not totally anti-Israel either. And within the story, or within the pages of this book, is the story of Bassem Aramin and Rami Elchanan, who happen to have known each other way back. Upon leaving prison, as you just mentioned, with the Palestinian Rami, after his 7 years after the misdeed that he committed, he founded a group together with Rami Elchanan, who to begin with was originally a graphic artist, and then became involved with this organization Combatants for Peace, which aims, it says, at bringing Israelis and Palestinians together to call for an end to the occupation. So they became activists, and they were already friends back in 2007. And then 10 years after, Rami's daughter, Masada, was killed. And then Bassem's daughter, 10-year-old Abir, was also killed after being wounded by a rubber bullet. So they're now working hand in hand, touring, it seems, the world to present a story of peace and reconciliation, which has a very dark side to it, which we're going to be elaborating, I guess, in our interview.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's some good background information. What do you think of the comparison between the experiences of the two men and what they went through? Are they equal experiences?
Well, that's the key point in this whole matter. There's an equivalence that's drawn between the death of Masada, who was murdered willfully by suicide bombers who were out to kill with total disregard for whom they killed. They killed in total cold blood. So Masada died that way, but Abir, the daughter of Bassem, the Palestinian, she died because of a rubber bullet which struck his daughter only as a result of some violence that had been stirred up by Palestinians in these frequent occurrences where the Palestinians confront the IDF. Violence ensued in all the fray that followed. A rubber bullet went in the direction of a beer. I don't think it was never maintained that it was intentional, but it struck her, and rubber bullets are not meant to kill, but in this case it did strike her seriously, and she died a couple of days later. So they now had something seriously in common with one another. They had both lost their daughters through the conflict.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like they both lost their daughters through Palestinian Arab violence in a sort of indirect way. But since we've gone public, we've been contacted by concerned community members who've reported additional Jewish venues that have hosted the two. As we were just speaking about before, we've had someone tell us that one of the speakers told a parent he should be ashamed of his son, a lone soldier in the IDF. And this was at a talk at a Jewish school. Another person's reported hearing them at a synagogue, where they call it Israel fascist, and they said that Arab rocket attacks don't kill, which obviously they do. But let's have a listen to what the speaker said on ABC, just so we can hear in their own words what message they're spreading in Australia.
Yes, and we don't know each other. We met by the cradle of the creation of a movement called Combatants for Peace.
The Jewish speaker.
Ex-Israeli war criminals and ex-Palestinian terrorists. Bassam was one of them, 2 years before his daughter was killed. And my son Elik, who served in an elite combat unit in the Israeli army and became refusnik, was one of the Israelis. And me and my wife, we were standing by the cradle of this new brave movement who have decided to fight injustice and the occupation in a non-violent manner. And we became very close friends. We came to their house in Anata, they came to our house in Jerusalem. We became close families. And then on the 16th of January 2007, we got a telephone call saying that Abi was hit. We spent 2 days by her bed. And for me, it was like losing my daughter for the second time.
You know, it's not personal. It's not a matter that the conflict between two individuals. It's a general hatred, you know. But it's built on a very common ground. It's the occupation. You cannot love your occupier. Otherwise, you'll be a slave.
So we see all the classic blaming this occupation, refusing orders, Israeli soldiers, war criminals. So David, what do you make of this interview and the ABC coverage of these speakers?
It's pretty much the classic type of reporting that one gets out of the ABC, where they present a view which taints Israel. The reference to anybody who's ever served in the Israeli army as being an ex-war criminal. I suppose you remain a war criminal if you still believe that the Israeli army is doing the right thing, defending the country. That's one aspect of what we just heard, which is a slate upon Israel, which is extremely anti-Israel. The other aspect is the way that Bassam Araman finishes the interview, where they are basically describing themselves as being partners in hate, that they both hate the occupier. And this seems to me to be the total opposite of what one would expect from anybody who's involved sincerely in peace and reconciliation.
Yeah, it's not a very loving message, and probably not something too appropriate for Jewish children to be hearing. And the ABC coverage got worse. We saw on their social media they went so far as to call Bassam as a former freedom fighter. He threw a grenade at some Israelis. So AUJS lodged a complaint with ABC on that, which is our second complaint against ABC this week. So it's classic ABC. But moving on to our next question. So we've heard complete silence from Jewish roof bodies. What do you think of the response from the communal leadership? And why do you think they refuse to comment on the speakers? And related to that, do you think parents and the Jewish community deserve answers about how and why these people were allowed to speak?
I tend to think that the Jewish community, in many aspects, is very wary of the Israeli-Palestinian dispute, and any indications or signs that there may be progress, we might be seeing light coming through a crack somewhere. Immediately there's a glimmer of hope, but it's all illusory. As we were just explaining, these two guys have got coming from a horrible agenda, coming equipped with a horrible agenda, and that's something that isn't sincere, as I've just been saying, towards true peace and reconciliation. They're wanting to undermine the Israeli government. They say they want to do it through non-violent means, but that often goes into violence, because these sorts of approaches are never totally controlled. The worst aspect of it, though, is that they've been brought out here by organisations that have been conned, I think, into believing that their message is a good one to convey to the community. But the trouble is that this isn't really the case. If they were brought out here by a New Israel Fund, some organisation like that, which we both know plays this type of game, where they're always introducing people who are presenting a view which is not pro-Israel, that's a different story. But bringing them out and implanting them in the very heart of the community, and most of all in front of children whose minds are very easily influenced, is a very dangerous proposition, and it just shouldn't have happened. I'm extremely keen, as an ex-parent of the King David School, to find out really what was said there, and that's something I'm following up to see if anything was said that really is beyond the pale.
100%. I think it's really important that you're doing that. Well, David, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. You've raised some really important points. To me, it feels like the ground's moving beneath our feet in the Jewish community. It feels like there's a bit of a shift. Might be a bit pessimistic, but it feels like some of the groups, some of the media outlets, whether it's New Israel Fund, Plus 61J, ZFA, Jewish News, they're all converging with different views on Israel than perhaps the community's used to. So voices like yours, voices like Morris Klein, they're more important than ever. So thank you for doing what you do and for speaking out on these important issues.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity, Rod.